Imagine two people walk into the same store. One sees a $200 pair of shoes and thinks, "That's ridiculous." The other sees a $200 pair of shoes and barely notices. But then something strange happens. The first person spends $200 on something that saves them 10 minutes a day. The second person spends $200 on something that makes them look successful, and if you only looked at the receipts, you might assume they have completely different financial priorities. But sometimes the opposite is true. Because wealthy people don't necessarily spend less money, they often spend money on things that are almost invisible, things that don't impress anyone, things that don't photograph well, things that don't make you look richer. And that raises a much more interesting question. What are some wealthy people actually buying when everyone else thinks they're wasting money? The answer has less to do with luxury than you might expect. It starts with a simple idea. Money can buy things, but it can also buy back something you can never earn more of: your time. Think about someone earning $50,000 a year. They might spend 2 hours comparing insurance plans to save $30. That can make perfect sense. If $30 matters significantly to your budget, spending time to save it is rational. But now imagine someone earning $500,000. Their calculation can be completely different. If paying an extra $30 means eliminating an hour of administrative work, they may gladly do it. Not because $30 has suddenly become meaningless, but because their scarce resource has changed. At lower levels of financial security, money is often the constraint. At higher levels, time, attention, energy, and flexibility can become the constraint. And this is where wealthy spending can start to look strange from the outside. They may pay for convenience that appears unnecessary. A cleaner. A tax professional. A better mattress. Food delivery. A more expensive flight because the schedule is better. Someone to handle paperwork. A service that removes a recurring annoyance. None of these purchases necessarily look impressive. But they are often buying something much more valuable than the object itself. They are buying friction reduction, and that distinction matters, because when money is tight, we naturally learn to optimize for price. We ask, what's the cheapest option? But when financial margin increases, another question becomes possible. What's the total cost of this decision? And total cost isn't always measured in dollars. Imagine you buy a cheap appliance for $50, it breaks twice. You spend 3 hours dealing with repairs. You replace it. You get frustrated. You lose time. The expensive version costs $150 and works for years. The cheaper option won on the receipt. But it may have lost everywhere else. This doesn't mean expensive is always better. It isn't. That's an important distinction. Wealthy spending isn't simply about buying premium versions of everything. It's about understanding where paying more actually removes a meaningful cost. And that leads to something even more interesting. Some people with money spend heavily on things other people barely notice because those things protect their future choices. Take health. Someone might spend more on a comfortable mattress, better food, preventative care, or a quieter home. None of these purchases necessarily signal wealth. In fact, they can look boring. But if better health allows you to think clearly, work sustainably, sleep properly, and avoid preventable problems, the return isn't really the product, it's capacity. You're buying the ability to function well tomorrow. And this is where the psychology of money gets complicated. Because most consumer culture teaches us to spend money on visible outcomes: a nicer car, a larger house, a better watch, designer clothes, the upgrade that other people can see. But some financially secure people eventually discover that the most valuable purchases are often the ones nobody can see. A quiet room, a flexible schedule, a reliable car, a competent professional, a few months of expenses sitting untouched, an afternoon that isn't filled with errands. These things don't create much status. But they create something else: control. And control is one of the most underrated forms of wealth. Think about the difference between two people earning the same salary. Person A has a large mortgage, expensive car payment, several subscriptions, a lifestyle built around their current income, and very little cash reserve. Person B has a smaller home, an older car, lower fixed expenses, and significant savings. On paper, they may look similar. But psychologically, they're living in different worlds. Person A may need the next paycheck. Person B may not, and that changes what each person can say yes or no to. A bad job feels different when you have 6 months of expenses saved. A sudden repair feels different when your budget has room. A career opportunity feels different when you don't need the highest possible salary immediately. This is why some people with substantial wealth become almost obsessive about things that look boring from the outside. They care about margin, not because they're afraid to spend. Because margin gives them options. And options are valuable precisely because you don't know when you'll need them. That's the paradox. The person with less money can sometimes be forced to optimize every purchase for immediate value. The person with more money can optimize for long-term flexibility. And that difference can compound. Consider a simple example. Someone gets a raise from $80,000 to $100,000. The natural reaction is to upgrade. A nicer apartment. A newer car. More restaurants. Better vacations. And none of those choices are inherently bad, but if the entire $20,000 increase becomes part of the new lifestyle, the raise may improve consumption without improving freedom. Now imagine the same person keeps most of their old lifestyle. The extra income goes towards savings, debt reduction, investments, or simply building cash reserves. Their life may not look dramatically different. But their relationship with uncertainty has changed. They've created distance between themselves and the next financial emergency. That distance is easy to underestimate. Because financial security is often invisible until something goes wrong. You don't notice the value of an emergency fund when everything is fine. You notice it when your car breaks. You don't notice the value of a flexible schedule until someone in your family needs help. You don't notice the value of low fixed expenses until your income suddenly falls. You don't notice the value of a healthy body until you're forced to live without it. This is why some wealthy spending can appear irrational if you judge it only by immediate pleasure. The real purchase may be resilience, but there's another category of spending that wealthy people often understand differently. They spend money to protect their attention, and this may be the most important one. Your attention is constantly being divided. Messages, emails, bills, appointments, shopping, maintenance, shopping, maintenance, shopping, maintenance, administrative tasks, small decisions, small problems. Each one seems insignificant, but the human brain doesn't experience them as a spreadsheet. Every unresolved task occupies some mental space, and eventually, you can have plenty of money and still feel poor in attention. That's why someone might pay an assistant to handle scheduling, or pay for grocery delivery, or automate their finances, or hire a professional to handle something they technically could do themselves. The goal isn't laziness, it's concentration. If removing 5 hours of low-value administrative work allows someone to spend those hours with their family, recover from work, or focus on something important, the purchase has a very different meaning. They're not buying convenience. They're buying back cognitive bandwidth, and that brings us to the part that is easy to misunderstand. You shouldn't copy wealthy people's spending habits. You should understand the logic underneath them. Because buying everything that looks expensive is not wealth, it's just expensive consumption. The useful question isn't, what do rich people buy? It's, what costs me more than the price suggests? Maybe it's a cheap car that constantly needs repairs. Maybe it's a long commute that steals 10 hours every week. Maybe it's a subscription you never use. Maybe it's a job that pays well but leaves you with no energy. Maybe it's a lifestyle with enormous fixed expenses that makes changing direction almost impossible. Maybe it's constantly buying things to keep up with people whose financial situation you don't actually understand. The price tag is only one part of the equation. There is also time, attention, stress, maintenance, risk, and future flexibility. That's the deeper lesson behind quiet wealth. The goal isn't to spend more. It's to spend with a better understanding of what you're actually buying. Because sometimes you're buying an object. Sometimes you're buying an experience. Sometimes you're buying an experience. And sometimes, without realizing it, you're buying an emotion. Status, security, relief, belonging, certainty. That's where spending becomes psychologically powerful. A person may say, I bought the expensive car because I wanted something reliable. And maybe they did, but another part of them may have wanted proof that they were finally doing well. Someone may buy the larger house because they need the space. Or because they've internalized the idea that their income should look a certain way. Someone may keep upgrading their lifestyle because stopping feels like falling behind. The financial decision is real. But so is the emotion underneath it. And once you can see that, spending becomes much easier to understand. You don't have to judge yourself for wanting nice things. You just have to ask a better question before buying them. What problem am I actually solving? If the answer is time, health, reliability, convenience, resilience, or freedom, the purchase may have more value than it appears to. If the answer is anxiety, comparison, boredom, or the need to prove something, the price may not be the real cost. Because you might solve the emotion for a few hours and still have the emotion tomorrow. And this brings us back to the person who walked into the store at the beginning. One person looked at a $200 purchase and saw waste. Another looked at it and saw time. Neither person was automatically right. The difference was what the money meant to them. And perhaps that's the biggest misconception about wealthy spending. We assume wealth is about being able to afford more things, but eventually, the more meaningful advantage may be being able to choose what you don't have to spend your life worrying about. You can spend money on a nicer car, or you can spend money making sure you don't have to think about the car for 10 years. You can spend money on a bigger house. Or you can spend money creating enough financial margin that your house doesn't control your life. You can spend money looking successful. Or you can spend money becoming harder to control. That is a very different definition of wealth. Because the richest looking purchase isn't always the most valuable one. Sometimes the best thing money can buy is something nobody else can see. A little more time. A little less friction. A little more room to breathe. And eventually, enough financial margin that when life becomes unpredictable, you don't have to panic immediately. Maybe that's what some wealthy people are really spending money on, not a better life to show other people. A life with fewer things capable of controlling them. And that kind of wealth is almost impossible to photograph.